You see that man in the high hat, the gold watch? That is a much younger Jimbo Fisher. And that's not a photo illustration. Well, it is of a sort, but the photo is real. Thank you to the Auburn Observer for that flashback from the mid to late 90s when Jimbo Fisher did indeed coach at Auburn. Could it happen again? Could Jimbo return to the sideline and do it on the plains? Crazier things have happened. This is Auburn we're talking about. So don't rule out anything. Hey, everyone. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky.
Hi, Kevin. I'm Brendan. And
hey, Brendan.
There's our
excellent. I call him the extraordinary producer, executive producer, Brendan Martin, who makes all of this go on the Sidelines.live network. Brendan, good to see you.
Apologize. It's Kevin. Have a good show. Just wanted to wish you well. Wish you was all that was. And that's a crazy idea about Jimbo Fisher. We'll talk to you soon.
I'm going to make it make sense, though. If you
follow
I know
if
the bouncing ball.
If anyone will. All right. Have a good show, sir.
Thanks, man. All right. We are going to discuss why this is not completely crazy, why I have not lost my mind. And before we dive into it, let's say thank you to our sponsor, Money Management Services, your family-owned, fee-only financial services firm in Birmingham, Alabama. You want to hook up with the Rice family. They will treat you right and do you well. So thank you to them. Now, again, I have not lost my mind. I have not completely taken leave of my senses. Two things happened in the last week to make me start thinking, got my wheels turning. And so we had to put two and two together and see what we could come up with. Now, event number one, Jimbo Fisher went on a podcast with a former Florida State fullback named Freddie Stevenson. You may not remember him. He was one of those grinders, one of those guys who makes things work behind the scenes, doesn't get the headlines. And he has a podcast. We'll give him a shout out, Trials to Triumph. He had Jimbo on the show. And Jimbo was on there for about an hour. And Jimbo, you think I talk fast sometimes. Jimbo talks at warp speed. I don't know what it is. He's much like Terry Bowden, who he worked for at Auburn from 93 to 98, in that he talks at a speed with which you cannot transcribe. If you're a reporter, unless you know true shorthand, you better tape your interviews with Jimbo. I learned that a long, long time ago. Now, Jimbo said, after a year on the sideline, after being asked to leave College Station, Texas, after his tenure at Texas A&M, that he wants to coach again. Now, this tells us a number of things. One, coaches are nuts, but they're also smart. They're nuts because once you have been on that sideline, once you have run practices, once you have developed the kind of relationships that Jimbo developed with guys like Freddie Stevenson at Florida State, guys like Patrick Nix at Auburn. And it was funny in the podcast when Jimbo was talking about his tenure at Auburn, he talked about Patrick Nix as one of his quarterbacks there. And he had a succession of quarterbacks that he got the best out of. Stan White at the end of his Auburn career, and then Patrick Nix, who followed, and then Damian Craig, who was just unbelievable and got Auburn to the SEC championship game in 1997, came up 1 point short of beating Peyton Manning in Tennessee in that SEC championship game. So Jimbo did a great job there. But in talking about Patrick Nix, to let people of a younger generation know who Patrick Nix was, he identified him as Bo Nix's daddy, which of course Patrick is. And Patrick is still coaching high school at a very high level in the state of Alabama at Central Phoenix City. Won a state championship a couple of years ago, and he'll be in contention again. So Jimbo started talking about returning to coaching, and he didn't name any particular schools. He just said he misses it. He loves it. He misses practices. He misses those relationships that you develop. So, look, Jimbo Fisher has 2 national championships on his resume. It is not crazy to think that someone at the end of this season, if Jimbo is serious and he wants to coach again, someone is going to hire him. Mark it down. Write it in ink. It will happen. The man won a national championship as a head coach at Florida State in 2013. And he was part of Nick Saban's staff in 2003 when LSU won the BCS national championship. Jimbo was the offensive coordinator. And if you ask Nick Saban, well, you can ask him. He won't answer this, not in public, certainly, who his favorite offensive coordinators were throughout his head coaching tenure. Jimbo would be on the short list, probably in the top 2. That's how much Nick Saban thought of Jimbo Fisher. Now, so Jimbo wants to coach again. And in the wake of Jimbo making this admission, we got one of the rights of August that tells us that college football is right around the corner. And it was the release of the AP preseason poll. And we all look forward to it. We know it doesn't mean what it used to mean. We know the only poll that truly matters will be the college football playoff poll, which won't begin until November. But the AP poll gives us something to talk about. It gives us numbers. It gives us starting positions. It gives us perception of what people think of these teams to start the season. And as you can see, despite what the Big Ten might think, the SEC is still considered the number 1 conference in America, the deepest conference in America, even though they didn't win the last 2 national championships, even though they didn't put a team in the last 2 national championship games. 10, a record for the AP preseason poll, 10 SEC teams came in the top 25, followed by 6 from the Big Ten, 4 from the Big 12, 3 from the ACC, 1 independent in Notre Dame, and then the group of 6 representative Boise State. Now, Texas, and again, this is mind-boggling that Texas, for all of its tradition, has never been, until now, the number 1 team in the preseason AP poll. That is hard to believe. So there you see the rankings. Now, let's break it down a little bit. Some of these teams, they're going to be teams in the top 10 that will not be ranked at the end of the season. That happened to Auburn under Gus Malzahn twice, where they started in the top 10 and they finished out of the poll. That's hard to do. That happened in 2015. They started 6 and ended unranked. In 2018, they started 9 and finished unranked. And in 2020, I should say, in 2020, Gus's last year, part of the reason it was his last year on the Plains, they started 11 and finished unranked. So some of these teams are going to vastly and wildly underperform. And then some of these teams, probably in that others receiving votes group, are going to overperform, and they will end up in the top 10. And the trick is trying to figure out which is which. But realistically, if history matters, if you believe in playing the percentages, there are only a small handful plus of teams on this list that have a realistic chance to win the national championship. Let's look at the teams most likely in that top 25 to be the last team standing when the season ends. Note the highlighted teams from 1 through 7. Why 1 through 7? Why is your national champion most likely to come from that group of Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Notre Dame, and Oregon? Because in 19 of the last 21 college football seasons, your national champion started in the top 7. It's bad news for Alabama if the trend holds, since the Tide checks in at number 8, just outside that group. The only exceptions to that rule, and 19 of 21 is a pretty strong trend. Back in 2013, we already mentioned Jimbo Fisher in Florida State. They started number 11 and put together one of the most dominant seasons in college football history behind quarterback Jameis Winston. They went undefeated. They dominated everybody in front of them. They didn't truly play a close game until they met Auburn and Gus Malzahn in the Rose Bowl in the last BCS championship game. And Florida State had to come from behind and score with 13 seconds left, 19 seconds left, something like that. Jameis threw a touchdown pass to Kelvin Benjamin to break Auburn's heart and prevent Auburn from winning its second national championship in a 4-year period after taking it in 2010 with Cam Newton at quarterback. That was the other exception to this rule of top 7 teams. One of them winning the national championship in 19 of the last 21 years. The other exception, of course, was Auburn in 2010. They started 22. That's coming from well off the pace, but they had a guy named Cam Newton at quarterback, as I mentioned. And that's the common denominator of those outliers, is a quarterback who won the Heisman Trophy and then went on and became the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. That happened with Cam Newton, and then it happened with Jameis Winston at Florida State. So unless you have a memorable, all-time great quarterback, you're most likely not coming from off the pace. You're likely not coming from out of the teams ranked 8 or below in the preseason AP poll to win a national championship. We'll see if that trend holds. But again, 19 out of 21 is a pretty significant number. But I want to focus today not on the top of the poll. That's easy. Everyone's doing that. We can debate whether Arch Manning is all that in a bag of golden flakes. We can debate whether Ohio State can go back-to-back, whether it's Clemson's time again to win another national championship, which would be number 3 for Dabo Swinney. Is Cade Klubnik good enough? He's gotten better. Is he good enough to lead a team to a national championship? Is Gunnar Stockton, who I think of as a modern-day Jeff Berger in terms of being a great fit for his school and a great leader for his school, may not have the greatest tools in the world, may have a great big-ass truck from what we hear. I know Jeff Berger did back in the day at Auburn in the late 80s. But we don't want to focus on those guys. Let's focus on the others receiving votes. Because one of those teams in that category, is this like Miss Congeniality in a beauty contest, others receiving votes? Somebody thought highly enough of these teams to at least give them a vote or two, maybe at 25 on their poll, maybe at 24. And you notice that the Auburn Tigers check in the others receiving votes category. And if you extrapolate out, if you go beyond 25, they would check in at number 37 overall and number 12 in the SEC. That tells you that to the voters in the AP poll, they don't think this is going to be a breakthrough season for Auburn. They don't expect Auburn to take a great leap forward after 4 straight losing seasons. They don't expect Hugh Freeze to get that thing turned around to where Auburn is the surprise team, the Indiana, if you will, of 2025, not based on these expectations. And Danger Will Robinson, you see Baylor as the 3rd team among those others receiving votes. And, of course, that's Auburn's opener in Waco, Texas. And if that game goes wrong for the Tigers, if Jackson Arnold struggles there, if Auburn can't beat Baylor, and I don't care that Baylor is expected to be a contender in the Big 12, if Auburn can't win that game, I suspect it's going to be a long season on the Plains. So what does this tell us about Auburn? Now, you are not anchored to your preseason ranking. As we've seen, Auburn has shocked experts before. In 2010, you start 22 and you win the national championship. In 2013, Gus Malzahn's first year, Auburn was not ranked to start that year. They won the SEC. They knocked off Alabama, derailed the Crimson Tide's attempt to win a 3rd straight national championship, got to the national championship game, pulled ahead of Jimbo Fisher and Florida State 21-3, and really let that game get away. Auburn, till the end of time, should kick itself for not winning that national championship. You get up 21-3. I know Florida State was very good. I know that they had so many future NFL players on their roster, far more than Auburn did. I know that they led the country in offense and defense that year. I know they beat number 3 or 4 Clemson something like 51-14 during the regular season. I know how good Florida State was. But you get up 21-3 in a championship game, shouldn't let it get away. But that's a debate for another time. So the perception of Auburn is either going to live down to expectations, or it's going to shock the world as it's done before and come out of nowhere to put itself, as Hugh Freeze predicts, suggests, believes, put themselves in the playoff discussion in November when the actual playoff poll is put out by the College Football Playoff Committee. We shall see if that comes to pass. But when I started looking at Auburn in the polls, I started looking at this trend of Auburn, the expectations for the Tigers being underwater. You know, Auburn's a top 15 football program all time, folks, whether you like it or not. This is a perennial national name, not on the order of Alabama. Don't get it twisted, as my friend Bart Heitch, longtime Auburn fan, even though he played basketball at Mississippi State, would like to say. Auburn has name recognition. Auburn has history. Auburn has tradition. Auburn has national championships. Auburn has Heisman winners. But Auburn has not been very good for some time now. Look at this chart of their poll plunge. These numbers are hard to believe. If you grew up in this state, I didn't, but if you came to this state after high school, if you started working in this business as I did back in 1985, the year Bo Jackson won the Heisman Trophy, I actually was the Auburn beat writer for the Birmingham News, my first writing job after I finished my graduate program at the University of Florida. Didn't quite finish it, didn't do the thesis, didn't earn my master's degree. I'm actually inquiring to see what I have to do that. And a whole nother story. Maybe I'll share that with you. That's a personal thing with my sons both attending the University of Florida. I told them I'd like to walk across the stage with the two of them. I don't know if that's reasonable, but we'll see what we can do. But if you've been around Auburn football for any length of time, you know this is not normal, what's been happening on the Plains. Auburn has not been ranked since November 7th, 2021. That was Brian Harson's first year on the Plains. November of 2021. They were ranked number 16 that week. And then they lost in a terrible, they had a huge lead. Mississippi State staged a great comeback. And then poof, Auburn was out of the poll, and they have not returned since. 55 consecutive Associated Press polls, top 25s, have appeared since the next week, November 14th, 2021, through this week's AP preseason poll, and not one of them has included Auburn in the top 25. That is unconscionable. That is indefensible. And that better change in a hurry, or Hugh Freeze won't get a fourth year on the Plains. 55 consecutive polls missed. Auburn has the longest poll drought of any team in the SEC. Longer than Vanderbilt, longer than Kentucky, longer than Arkansas, longer than Mississippi State. All of those teams have been ranked more recently than Auburn. And Auburn hasn't appeared in the preseason AP poll in the top 25. We're not talking others receiving votes. That's not the standard. That's not the goal. That's not the place you want to be if you've produced people like Pat Sullivan and Bo Jackson and Cam Newton and Tracy Rocker and Brent Fullwood and Gerald Robinson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you've been coached by people like Shug Jordan and Pat Dye, you should not be content to be one of the others receiving votes. But that's where Auburn finds itself, which is why if you take the preseason poll and you take Jimbo Fisher's recent appearance on a podcast with one of his former Florida State players saying he wants to return to coaching, you add 2 and 2 together, and what do you get in terms of speculation in terms of wild possibility, in terms of could this really happen, you get Jimbo Fisher to Auburn. Possibly, maybe, probably not. But haven't stranger things happened in college football? Haven't crazier coaching hires occurred on the plains in recent years? I know a lot of people, and I was one of them, didn't think John Cohen, who recently at the time had arrived in Auburn from Mississippi State, would hire the former coach at Ole Miss, who was well aware of what happened at Ole Miss when Hugh Freeze was the coach there, when things went wrong. A lot of us didn't think John Cohen would be part of hiring Hugh Freeze. He was. Auburn did hire him. And so far, it hasn't worked out. In terms of recruiting, yes. In terms of results on the field, no. And that's got to change, and it's got to change fairly quickly. And you will see the change if Auburn can get off to a good start, if they can get it done in Waco, Texas, if they can beat Baylor in the opener and get into the AP poll and then spend some time there and go to Norman, Oklahoma in late September and beat the Sooners, which you couldn't do last year. Then the next week, go to College Station, Texas, and beat Texas A&M. Show that you are that team that's going to shock the world, that's going to come off the pace, that's going to get Auburn football back to where it's supposed to be. But we're a long way from there. Now, a little backstory on Jimbo Fisher. And he kind of sort of got his facts wrong about his own career in that podcast. He said at the time, now you'll recall, let's set this up a little bit. Back in the winter, late fall of 2006, Alabama is searching for a head coach. It has fired Mike Shula. But we know, and I knew at the time from my reporting, and a lot of people laughed at me, mocked me publicly for suggesting that Alabama was going after Nick Saban. I actually reported that a week before Alabama fired Mike Shula. So I had good sources. But as that pursuit went on and they took the off-ramp toward Rich Rodriguez because they got nervous, they thought Saban wouldn't wait, or if they waited for Saban until after the NFL season with the Dolphins, where he was at the time, what if he says no? Then we're stuck. And by the way, and Mal Moore, one of my favorite people, probably the greatest accomplishment of his career was convincing Nick Saban and being part of convincing Nick Saban to take the Alabama job. And, of course, his great line was that he told the pilot, if he says no, he was on a private plane of a booster at the time. And Mal told the pilot, if I don't get him, you might as well just fly me straight to Cuba. I can't go home. And I also learned that had Saban gotten cold feet at the last minute, had Wayne Huizenga, the Dolphins owner, convinced him to stay in Miami for another year, for a third year with the Dolphins, you know who the fallback positions were? It was two coaches who were coaching in the Orange Bowl in South Florida at the same time. Bobby Petrino from Louisville, and this is going to make Alabama fans' heads explode who don't know this, Jim Grobe from Wake Forest. It's a true fact. So fortunately for Alabama, Saban said yes. Mal was very convincing. Terry Saban loved Mal Moore, and the rest is history. So at that time, UAB was looking for a new head coach. Watson Brown, his time had come to an end, and he had done such yeoman's work there to get that football program off the ground. Now, Jim Hillier was the first UAB coach. Let's never forget that. When they were a club program, when they were a Division III program, when they were a Division I AA program, as it was called at the time. Jim Hillier did that heavy lifting. But he passed the baton to Watson Brown, who took UAB into the Football Bowl subdivision and did unbelievable work there. He had to serve as the athletic director for a time. He had to fend off the Board of Trustees, which is a recurring theme throughout UAB football's history. But Watson's time had come to an end. So UAB football is looking for a head coach at the same time that Alabama football is looking for a head coach. And UAB found its man. UAB was ready to hire. They had an agreement in principle with a hot, up-and-coming young coordinator who had been a part of a national championship team. He'd been a part of SEC championship teams. His name was Jimbo Fisher. UAB was about to to put an entourage onto a plane at the Birmingham airport to fly to Baton Rouge to bring Jimbo Fisher back here for a press conference to introduce him as its new head coach. And the board of trustees stepped in and said, you know what? It's fiscally irresponsible for you, UAB, to pay a head coach $600,000 a year. Seems quaint now, doesn't it? $600,000 a year. That was the figure. Half of it was going to be paid by boosters. The deal was all set. Jimbo was coming until the trustees said no. Now, one of the reasons, maybe there were a trustee or two who really were concerned about fiscal responsibility and UAB's ability to bring in revenue and pay a coach even $600,000 a year, or their cut was $300,000 while the boosters were going to pay the other $300,000, some boosters. Maybe there were some that truly felt that way. That was a mistake from that perspective. But I know that there were other trustees who realized that they felt, they believed, they hoped they were about to hire Nick Saban, and Nick Saban, in putting together a staff in Tuscaloosa, might want to hire Jimbo Fisher, one of his favorite offensive coordinators of all time. So the trustees shot down Jimbo Fisher to UAB. So Jimbo had other choices, though. He could have stayed at LSU, where he was the OC under Les Miles. He had stayed there after Saban went to the NFL. And then came another option, Bobby Bowden in Florida State. And they didn't make it formal at the time. It took a year or so that Jimbo became the coach in waiting to succeed Bobby Bowden in Tallahassee. And so Jimbo chose not to reunite with Nick Saban at Alabama, but to leave LSU for Florida State. And he was the OC for Bobby Bowden in his final seasons, and then he took over and really started out fantastic. Again, within a few years, his fourth year or so, about won that national championship in 2013, won 2 or 3 ACC championships in a row. You know, Jimbo, as he pointed out, almost as if he were doing a preliminary job interview in that podcast where he said he wants to coach again, he reminded people he's won 72% of his games as a head coach, 8 years at Florida State, 6 years at Texas A&M. Now, he didn't get into a lot how things went wrong at the end at Florida State and things went wrong at the end at Texas A&M. Now he left Florida State. Now, part of that was he wasn't getting the kind of support behind the scenes and commitments to facilities and other investments in the program at FSU that he thought the program required and had earned. It's part of the reason he couldn't say no to Texas A&M when they came throwing all this money at him, all these facilities, upgrades. Texas A&M gave him everything he wanted. It didn't work out. Had some moments. 2020, went 9-1, almost made the playoff. Was the first former Nick Saban assistant to beat the boss back in 2021. And by the way, Texas A&M under Jimbo Fisher was the only coach of an unranked team to beat Nick Saban from 2000 and Alabama from 2008 to 2023. Think about that. So Jimbo did a lot of good things, both at Florida State and at Texas A&M. But it didn't end well at either place. Could have been the head coach at UAB, you know, if some different things had happened, if some different people had made some different decisions, but it didn't happen. So Jimbo Fisher, if he wants to coach again, and he sounded sincere, as all coaches do, it's hard to walk away from that. And it's not just the money. Jimbo's set financially for life. He doesn't have to coach another football game. He doesn't have to go through another fall camp. He doesn't have to stand up in front of a room and answer questions from people like me ever again if he chooses not to. But as Nick Saban said for years and years, when you're part of a team for your entire life, it's hard to walk away from that. And Jimbo seems to have the itch to want to coach again. So given that, given the success he did have during his head coaching career, given the ties that he has at any number of schools, he played at Samford, not wishing ill upon Chris Hatcher. He's a great guy. He's done a nice job at Samford. Hard to believe Jimbo would go back to the football championship subdivision, though. When you've brought a team out of the tunnel in Kyle Field and Bryant-Denny Stadium and Jordan-Hare Stadium as a head coach, it's hard to imagine going back that far down the ladder. It's nothing against Samford. It's a great school, great athletic department, great university with a great president and a great athletic director. It's my Samford commercial. But it's also hard to see Jimbo going back to a place like UAB. Trent Dilfer's on the hot seat. It's his third year there. If he doesn't get that turned around, they may be looking for a coach again. Would they be interested in bringing Jimbo back? They almost had him. They almost had him after the 2006 season. They thought they had him until higher powers intervened on the board of trustees. Hard to see him going back there. UAB is a hard job. They're all hard jobs. Gene Bartow used to say that. Every job is a hard job for different reasons. UAB is harder than ever. So it's hard to imagine Jimbo going back there. But Auburn, in the SEC, a place where you can recruit, as Hugh Freeze is demonstrating, a place where you can win championships, as Gus Malzahn demonstrated, as Gene Chizik demonstrated. So you got to know that Jimbo Fisher believes that if that opportunity presented itself and Auburn were looking for a head coach and Jimbo were unemployed, there might be some backroom conversations. There might be some phone calls made. There might be some relationships tapped into that have existed for years. I'm not making a prediction. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Don't get it twisted. I am saying that if Jimbo Fisher wants to coach again, come December, he will get a coaching job. And if Auburn is looking for a coach in December, I'm not predicting it. I'm not wishing it upon anyone to lose their job. I'm not saying Jimbo Fisher will be the next coach at Auburn when the time comes. I'm saying don't count it out. Don't discount the possibility. You may say, if you're an Auburn fan, and I've already gotten some blowback, I wrote a column on this in the Birmingham News, and you can find that on al.com/sports, where I write twice a week. Got a lot of blowback from Auburn fans saying, hell no. No, thank you. We'd rather, if we're going to move on, let's go younger. Let's not find another retread like Hugh Freeze if it doesn't work out this year. So it might not be popular. It might not be logical. It might not seem like the thing to do. But it would very much be Auburn, being Auburn, to hire someone like Jimbo Fisher. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. And that's all I've got to say for today. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. This is Scarbo Knows. Thank you to Brendan Martin, the executive producer, the extraordinary producer that makes all of this work on the Sidelines.live network. Check out all the great shows, Rob Brown, Buddy Martin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And check out our sponsor, Money Management Services.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family, because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.